The other day, I posted this prompt, do you have questions about TDD? Ask away, and I'll try to respond to each Q in a new thread. I didn't get a lot of response, but I did get this very interesting question from, I believe that's Milan. So I wanted to respond to it, and I'm doing it in a video. I told him just a while ago, I said, I'm making a video response now, we'll post later. Let's look into this question here. He says, when you test collections, you start with 0 items and then 1. And this forces you to write a conditional because you have to handle both conditions, 0 and 1. And then you test for 2. And so now you change the if condition to a loop. But if you start with 1 and then 2, you end up at the loop again, but without the test for 0. Is this test needed then? This is a really interesting question. It causes us to have to make some decisions about how our production code should behave, and I wanted to respond with some code. So I've followed Milan, by the way. I gave him a follow, and I understand he's got a blog at Medium. Let's move over to some code. I have a module called vtest imported. I've already npm installed it, and over here on the right-hand side, I have a terminal window. So I'm gonna go npm test, and this will start the vtest suite or module. Notice I have one failed test already. Well, not a failed test. I have a failure, and it says no test suite found. And let's go over here. So in this test suite file, I'm importing the describe, expect, test objects from vtest. I've got the link to the original Twitter question here, and I've copied Milan's question just for reference sake. Let's get started. If I were to test a collection, well, I guess let's just describe a collection for now. We'll start with very straightforward, and I might just say I want to expect my collection builder function to be type of object. Okay, so let's pretend I want to create a function which returns an object. Notice on the right-hand side of my screen, I now have a failing test. My collection builder is not defined, so let's go and define that. I'm just going to write it in a function here in the same file for now. My collection builder is a function, and let's say it's just going to return null. Oh, I have to wrap this in a test. Say my collection returns something. I forgot to wrap that in a test. And then I'll move my expectation up into the test. Now on the right-hand side, I have a passing test. How did that happen? My code expected a function, my collection builder function, to return something, and that something would be a type of object. Null is a type of object, but it's not a collection yet. So Milan's question is important. Let's make another expectation here. We'll say we're going to ask JavaScript array prototype to verify is this thing an array, and we'll put my function return in there, and we'll say this should be true. Notice I still have notice now I have a failing test in the right-hand side of my screen. It fails because the return of this function is not an array. So let's change the production code. Now it returns an array. My collection, oh, I was failing for the wrong reason. Let's go back here. It's failing for the correct reason now. I expected the function to return something that would be an array, and it didn't. It returned a null. Now we'll change this to array, and we have a passing test. This is the case Milan began with, that we're testing a collection that is empty. It has 0 items. And this is now what our function returns. But I was thinking carefully how I would tell the story of how I would approach this problem. I'm not going to work with a function called my collection builder. I think I need something more real world I need maybe an analogy or a metaphor. I want to tell you about my dog. Okay, my dog is able to fetch, and sometimes I'll get him to fetch a toy or cookies or mail. Go get the mail, go get my shoes. And with each of these behaviors that my dog is capable of doing, he'll return a collection of things. So I want to tell you about Coco. And to do that, I'm going to change our description to say, describe Coco's behaviors. And we'll say Coco can fetch something. And I'll change my function name to say Coco to fetch. Now, if I just read the sentence, expect Coco to fetch something, and it will be of type object. Expect that whatever Coco fetches, it's an array of objects. It's an array, not yet an array of objects, but let's add some tests to describe what Coco can do. So if I test Coco can fetch cookies. Now, if I ask my dog to go get cookies, here's the problem. He'll disappear for a while, and then I presume he finds some cookies, and he doesn't return them to me. He eats them. So when he comes back to me, he has an empty collection, right? He's not returning anything. And so I'm going to expect when, if I get Coco to fetch cookies, that the length of this return object, the length of this array, to equal, let's say, 0. Now we have a passing test, even though I haven't changed my production code. That's interesting. So I'm not going to modify the production code just yet, although I know in my mind that I haven't handled the case where I've asked my dog to return cookies. But we're at that first condition of Milan's question, where we've started with a collection and we've tested for 0 items. And now what happens if we ask my dog to get a toy? Let's find out. He's pretty good at this. He can get a toy. Coco can fetch his toy. If I ask him, where's your toy? He gets his favorite toy. It's always one thing. That's a true story. I'll show you later in a video. We can expect Coco to fetch something called toy, and that the length of this collection will be equal to 1. Now we have a failing test. This causes us to return to our production code up here and add the condition for the toy. If I follow Milan's lead, I think he implied that he would write an if statement. So let's do that. Say if the request, I haven't asked anything yet. So I want to handle the toy description. So I'm going to say I'm going to request something from the dog, right? And by default, this will be null. But now I can use that parameter and say if the request is equal to toy, then return an array with 1 object in it. And now we have a passing test. Follow Milan's lead. If I say Coco can fetch shoes, now there should be 2 objects, right? A left shoe and a right shoe. We have a failing test on the right-hand side of my screen. That means I have to go write some production code to pass this test. I suppose I could go, else if blah, 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 or I could do a loop as Milan implied, but you know what? I don't like doing that. I'm going to use a switch. So while I refactor, I want to make sure that I refactor my production code such that it passes the previous tests that I know were already passing. So for the time being, I'm just going to skip this last test. And I'm going to go up to my production code and refactor things so that I'll use, instead of an if statement, I'm going to say, let's switch based on the request. We will handle different cases. So we'll, by default, we'll return an empty array. In the case that we ask the dog for a toy, we're going to return an array with one object in it. And over here, I'm passing all the tests. You see that? So I've refactored, and I can get rid of this extraneous code. Extraneous code? Erroneous code? Don't know. Now I can work on the new test, the new behavior that I want to describe, which is the case where I ask Coco to fetch shoes. And now on the right-hand side, you can see I've got a failing test. Now in my production code, I can handle the case where I ask for shoes, and I expect the dog to return a collection, and it has 2 objects in it. As such, I'm passing. Now at this point, Milan asked the question, can we get rid of the first test where we're expecting an empty collection? I can see a circumstance where maybe that's sensible. However, just this past week, I ran into a bug in some production code with Netlify's command line interface. 2 months ago, Netlify modified their CLI, and in this version of the code, they expect a manifest entry object, and they're in a line of code. They are expecting that manifest entry object has properties, but in my build, I haven't made a manifest document specifically for Netlify's configuration. I just because this wasn't a requirement prior to 2 months ago, so you didn't have to have a manifest document. But they haven't handled the case where there is no manifest, and their code breaks. So this is an issue, and I hope that they fix it. But this is an error in their thinking. Okay, they didn't have a test in place for the most obvious failure mode. The most obvious failure mode for a collection is that there will be 0 items in it. And I would keep the test, Milan, I would. Look at my screen. I'm just going to leave the default return value as an empty collection. I'm going to keep these 2 tests, or this test up here, and these expectations. And there you have it. That's my thought process. I might think differently tomorrow about this problem, but thanks for the question, Milan. And for anyone watching, if you found this format interesting, please like and share and subscribe, and share with me some thoughts in the comment section. And if you have other questions, please ask, and I might find opportunity to make another video in the future. Thanks. Coco, fetch cookies. Coco, fetch shoes. Coco, fetch toy. Where's your toy? Good, Coco. Wow.